Can you all see the page? Do you need it to be a little larger? Let me see. Is that a little better? You can see this on your page. Okay. See, I saw somebody who had a chat. Good, except I'm choking on grape juice. Oh, that's not good. Thanks for sharing that with everyone, Kathy. Good evening, everyone, and welcome again to our lecture series. So what we are going to do tonight, I'm going to finish off the Heian period of Japan by introducing you to a couple of more important figures, as well as introducing you a little bit to the arts of Buddhist art during that time. One of the key features of early Buddhism in Japan is that you'll find the artistry of whether it's the sculpture making or the murals, the paintings, very, very exquisite and in fine detail. And I'll mention a little bit more about this in particular. There's one statue that is famous for it. But anyways, and then next week, we will have one more session, and I will introduce you in that session to some of the key principal individuals in the what we call Kamakura period, and some of the main lineages that form during that period as well. And then I'd like to go into the summer break because that'll be the end of June next week. So it'll be a perfect time, timing wise, to go into a summer break. And then I'll hopefully start off, hopefully in September, maybe October again. And what I'd like to do then is to more concentrate on the Pure Land Buddhist aspect. And go into a little bit of the history of Pure Land Buddhism, particularly in Japan, and then leading up to the present day. And maybe we could, I might introduce a book or two that we could review. Okay. So do you need it bigger than this, or is this okay? Can you see the screen large enough, or do you need it larger? It's okay. Okay. So oh, some people are getting bounced out. I don't know why. Yeah. So in the Heian period, the Nara period, the Heian period, and the Kamakura period, the Buddhist art, as I mentioned, flourished, and the artwork, the sculptures were so fine and detailed, and they're. Oh, why is everybody? So I wanted to introduce some of the major deities that were mentioned, and I mentioned some of them before, like this Mahavajrayana Buddha or the Dainichi Yorai. And in the esoteric tradition, this Dainichi Yorai is the central solar divinity from where all other Buddhas represent one aspect of this Buddha. So in the Shingon and Tendai Buddhist schools that I introduced previously, this is a very important Buddha. And it's often sitting on a lotus blossom, with supposedly 1,000 petals. And each petal represents its own world with an image of Shakyamuni Buddha on it. And each of these Buddhas also are said to be seated on 1,000 petal lotus blossoms. And the most common form of this type of statue, that's Dainichi Nyorai, has its mudra, hand gesture, is in what we call Chiken-in, or the wisdom fist, with the index finger of the left hand is pointed up and wrapped by the 5 fingers of the right hand. And it's to show the union of the 6 elements. So in Tendai and Shingon, it says that everything is made out of these 6 elements: earth, water, fire, air, or wind, and the void or ether, and the mind, consciousness. So Dainichi Nyorai is supposed to be the center of the universe. And then here is a little different image of the same Dainichi Nyorai, and this is the one at the Todaiji, or the Todaiji Temple in Nara. And I introduced this one before, and I showed you how this one was made. It was so big that they couldn't use one cast. So what they did was they did it in sections, and they would do the first section, the base, and then they would fill in with earth around it. Then they would put another cast on top, and then they fill that in, and then so they did it in stages. And that's at the Todaiji in Nara. Another very famous historical, and one of the oldest statues, is a statue of what we call Shakyamuni Buddha, the historical Buddha. And so in the Buddhist teaching, there are what we call the 3 Buddha bodies. One is called Dharmakaya. Dharmakaya is the universe itself. It has no shape, no form. It is the infinite. Okay. Dharma, Dharma, and Kaya is Kaya. And Kaya means body. Okay, so the Dharma body, which transcends our conceptualization, our minds. Then there is what we call this, and here it says Sambogakaya. Sambogakaya is what we call the recompense Buddha, or so out of this Dharmakaya, in order for us to conceptualize things, it needs to take on some kind of form. And so the Sambogakaya are the many different Buddhas. So they're all manifestations of this true reality. And the third kind is what we call Nirmanakaya. And Nirmanakaya is the actual Buddha that came into this world. Okay, so it's almost like, and don't, I would get in trouble, I guess, because I know I've mentioned this to Buddhist scholars, and they've chastised me before. But I can use a comparison of the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost in Christianity, where you have these 3 ideas, I guess, right? Where the Holy Ghost is really more ephemeral, if you will, and that's very much like the Dharmakaya. And then you have this figure that's born from that, and that's included in that is what we call Amida Buddha. Amida Buddha is one of those Sambogakaya. Then you have an actual physical entity that's born into this world, and that for us in Buddhism is Shakyamuni Buddha. and it's called Nirmanakaya. Nirmanakaya. So usually, so in this one here, and this is very typical of what you will find in the temples, and they're called triads. You have three statues usually together. And this one is known as a Shaka triad because the Shakyamuni Buddha, statue of Shakyamuni Buddha is in the center here. And it's flanked on either side by the two bodhisattvas, Monju Bosatsu, the bodhisattva law, and Fugen Bosatsu, the bodhisattva practice on the right. Okay. And the hand position of Shakyamuni Buddha, in this case, is the position of expounding the Dharma. Okay. So this is him expounding the Dharma. This is thought to have been one of the earliest statues that was introduced to Japan, and it's back in AD 623. And so it actually predates even the Nara period, which is the period. Nara period is the period before the Heian period, and Nara was the capital of Japan during that period. And then during Heian period, the capitals moved from Nara to Kyoto. And so this is a very, very old statue in a temple called Holy Temple in Nara, which is one of the oldest temples in Japan. So Yakshina Yorai, this is also another very old statue, or the medicine or healing Buddha. And it was introduced to Japan. One of the reasons for introducing it was that it was supposed to ward off disease and calamity. So for the well-being of the country, if you will, this medicine Buddha was introduced. And often this medicine Buddha would be normally holding, it almost looks like a little pear that it's holding, but it's actually a medicine bottle that is to help all beings. And interestingly enough, though, there aren't that many temples with, there are temples that have this Yakshina Yorai, or this medicine Buddha, but it's usually not the central figure in the temples. And that's kind of interesting, because you would think, especially with the government-run temples, that they would have wanted for the well-being of the citizens. So you would think that this would have been a much more prominent Buddha, but it isn't. So this one is the Maitreya Bodhisattva, Miroku Bosatsu. And the teaching within the Mahayana Buddhism, the cosmology or the chronology of Buddhism, it was said that it occurs in different stages. So in the Mahayana Buddhist chronology of things, it said that the first 500 years after the Buddha passed away is what we call the right Dharma age. And why it's called the right Dharma age is that it was thought that during this period, the teachings are still relatively fresh. And so there are three elements that have to exist. One is the teachings exist, and then there are those who practice the teaching, and finally there are those who attain enlightenment through their practices of the teachings. So when all three of these exist, we call that the right Dharma age. And that was said to be for about the first 500 years. Still very pure teaching. Okay. Then for the next 1,000 years, it's called the Semblance Dharma Age, or in Japanese, Zobo. So the first 500 was Shoho, and then the next 1,000 is Zobo. And during this period, what's set to happen is that the teachings get further and further away from the origin, and therefore it becomes a little bit more corrupt. And as it becomes more corrupt, what you'll find is even though the teachings are there are fewer people that are actually following that teaching, and then very little actually attain enlightenment. Then the next 10,000 years is what's known as the Mappo, or the last or declining Dharma age. And so if you go into the calculations of Japan during what we call the Kamakura period, this is a time where our denomination, Jodo Shinshu, was formed. This is when Zen Buddhism in Japan becomes popular. This falls approximately 1,500 years after the passing of the Buddha. So now you can see it's getting into what we call this last Dharma age. And this idea of last Dharma age becomes very popular in China, Korea, and Japan. Meaning that in this last era, the last 10,000 years, the teachings still exist, but now there are very few who actually follow those teachings, and almost no one actually attains enlightenment because we're so far removed from the Buddha, the existence of the Buddha. At the end of this 10,000 year period, it is supposed to be a period called Homitsu, and Homitsu is when the Dharma dies out. However, at that point, then the next Buddha comes into the world and disseminates his or its Dharma, if you will. And that is said to be this Maitreya Bodhisattva. Maitreya or Miroku Bodhisattva is said to be the coming Buddha, if you will. And that'll be 10,000 years from now. Well, not quite 10,000 now, maybe 9,000 years from now. Okay. And so this statue is a very famous statue. It comes from a temple in Kyoto called Koryuji. Koryuji is situated, there's so in Japan, it's not quite like Universal Studios, but it's where, all the samurai movies are filmed. So there's a place called Eigamura. Eigamura means movie town. And it's a lot, basically, with where they do a lot of the samurai the films, and which are still very popular in Japan. Anyways, this Koryuji Temple is located just beside this Eigamura, and it's a very old temple and very famous. But this statue in particular became so famous because it was said to be the most beautiful Buddhist statue. And in fact, there's a legend associated with it, with that there was a university student, I believe he went to Kyoto University, who fell in love with this statue. And one day he reached out to touch it because he was just so enthralled by its beauty. And it said that he broke off the little finger of this statue. But this, I don't know if you could see it that well, but and whether you agree or not, but it's said to be the most beautiful statue. But it's very much similar, if you will, to the Thinker by Rodin. This very pensive looking, contemplative look. You can see pondering over something, the future, I guess. And then, of course, one of the most popular deities that appeared during this time is what we call the Kannon Bosatsu, Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva, or the Bodhisattva of compassion. So originally, this Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva was a masculine figure in India. So if you look at the one on the screen, it's missing its hands for one thing. Somewhere along the line, it lost its hands. But you can see that it's well, maybe it's a little feminine, but it's quite masculine in its appearance. And when it went to China, however, it became very feminine. And there are explanations or reasonings for that. And one of them was that there was already an indigenous female divinity, which was worshipped around the time that this Bodhisattva came into China. And once it became this female form, it became very popular in the in North or Asian countries. And usually it's associated in one or two ways. One is with the Amida Triad. So here at our temple, we only have Amida Buddha, but in many Pure Land temples, you'll have this, what we call Amida Triad, 3 statues, with Amida Buddha in the center and with the Kannon Bodhisattva on the left side and the Seishi or Mahasama Prata Bodhisattva on the right side. And the Bodhisattva on the right is a Bodhisattva of wisdom, and the one on the left, Kannon, is a Bodhisattva of compassion. And so they're showing the 2 elements of Amida Buddha, wisdom and compassion. But you'll also find many temples where this Kannon is the main figure worship. And they're included are the 11-headed Kannon and the 1,000-armed Kannons. And here's several images of this Kannon. So you'll see this image on the left here from China, and it does have a very, very feminine aspect, appeal to it. Maybe you can see how it looks very feminine, right? And then the one beside it is the 1,000-armed and 11-headed Kannon. So the 1,000-armed and 11-headed, I've mentioned this before. The Kannon was one of the things as a bodhisattva. They make vows to save all sentient beings in suffering. And Kannon had vowed to save all those suffering in hell. And just when they thought it had completed its work, it took one breath of relief and looked over his shoulders and saw that hell was again filled with beings suffering. And so from that point on, it vowed that it would not rest and look out in all directions. So you have the Kannon with all the Buddha heads on top of it. And then the 1,000 arms are to represent all the ways that it's going to help those in suffering. So often they'll have some of the arms will carry weapons, as a matter of fact, to ward off evil spirits. And some of the hands will have like the healing, the medicine bottle as well. Now, a real interesting adaptation to this Kannon Bodhisattva took place in Japan during the Edo period between 1600 to 1800, because there was a period of time where Japan became a very isolated country, and anything that was brought in from outside the country seemed to be not good. And Christianity was actually quite heavily persecuted. So there were Christian organizations, particularly in Nagasaki area. Nagasaki was one of the ports where the foreigners would come into. And so the Jesuits came in there from Spain, I think it was. They were one of the earliest that came in, but Christianity was heavily banned and persecuted. So in Nagasaki, there's a creation of what we call Maria Kanno. So if you look at this statue on the left, it's carrying an infant there, and it looks very much. You can see how the image of Maria is affecting it, and this Maria Kanno was said to what they would do in these underground Christian organizations. They would claim that it's a Buddhist temple with Kannon Bodhisattva as a central figure, but to them, it was actually the image of Virgin Mary. So they ended up calling this the Maria Kannon, it's known as. And so again, another way that Kannon is depicted is in this Amida Triad. So you have Buddha, the Amida Buddha in the center, and then off to the left is Kannon, and to the right is this Seishi Bosatsu, or the Bodhisattva wisdom. So this is often how you'll find the Amida statue in many temples, except here in Jodo Shinshu, Shinran Shoni said, because Amida Buddha encapsulates both wisdom and compassion, we don't need, it's not necessary to show these two elements as independent elements. And so in Jodo Shinshu temples, it's basically just the Amida Buddha. Okay, so getting onto it with Amida Buddha then. So very early recordings Amida Buddha come in around 640 AD. So this is right when Buddhism was being introduced into Japan. And it became very prominent in the Tendai school in particular. And there is this great monk by the name of Ganzan Daishi Ryogen. Ryogen is his name. Ryogen was the third abbot at Mount Hiei. That's the school that was founded, the Tendai school that was founded by Saicho, who I introduced a couple sessions ago, I believe. But this Ryogen became very famous because by the time he came onto the scene, the Tendai school was still a small hermitage. It wasn't that big. Saicho had formed a school. It was on Mount Hiei, but it wasn't really that well noted. And it was this Ryogen who really, he was almost like a politician, they say. And he did many things to advance the Tendai school and made it become very, very prominent amongst various Buddhist denominations. And so it said that he had 3,000 disciples at Mount Hiei. And one of them was this individual by the name of Genshin. And we'll talk about Genshin in just a second. But Ryogen was actually one of the first to make commentaries on the Pure Land writings on Mount Hiei. And in particular, he made commentaries on the rebirth in the Contemplation Sutra. And he explains that rebirth of the 9 grades of existence. So in our Pure Land school or teachings, there are what we call the 3 Pure Land Sutras, the most important teachings associated with Amida Buddha. The first one is known as the larger Skavati Vyuha Sutra, or the larger sutra on Amida Buddha. The second one is known as the Contemplation or the Dhyana Sutra. And the third one is the smaller Skavati Vyuha Sutra, or the smaller sutra on Amida. Okay. And the contemplation sutra in particular is quite unique. There's a whole story that is associated with it. It is the story of Prince Ajatasattu and his parents, King Bimbisara and Queen Vaidehi. King Bimbisara is quite an interesting character. He lived, he's a contemporary of the historical Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha, and he became a very devout follower of the Buddha. And in fact, he made his kingdom a Buddhist kingdom. And his son, many of you have heard me tell this story of the birth of Prince Ajatasattu. So King Bimbisara and Queen Vaidehi didn't have a child for many, many years. So they go and see this mountain ascetic to see how they can have a child. And when they go and see this ascetic, the ascetic tells them not to worry, that in due time, he's going to pass away and he'll come back. He will come back as an incarnation. He will be born as a child, is what this ascetic says. And of course, King Bimbisara asks him when that's going to be, and the ascetic says, in due time. And that wasn't good enough answer for King Bimbisara, so King Bimbisara has some of his guards kill the ascetic so that he could speed up the process, right? But just before he dies, it said that this ascetic warns them, saying, "Mark my words, I will get my revenge." Okay. So after he passed away, Queen Vaidehi does in fact become pregnant. And at first they're overjoyed that she's gonna have, she's pregnant. But then they start fearing this prophecy that this ascetic said, mark my words, I'm going to get my revenge. So just before the baby was born, Queen Vaidehi and King Bimbisara said to climb to the top of a tower, and as soon as the baby is born, they throw the baby off this tower, and fearing for the revenge. But as soon as they do that, they realize the horror of the terrible thing that they did. But miraculously, this baby survives unscathed, except for one broken baby finger. And so the king and queen raised this infant with all the love that they could give, realizing what a stupid and terrible thing that they did. And everything is fine until this Ajatasattu, Prince Ajatasattu, becomes a young man. And it's then that the cousin of the Buddha, his name was Devadatta, and he was sort of like the Judas in Buddhism. He was always a thorn in the Buddhist side. Devadatta approaches this Prince Ajatasattu and asks him, "Do you know the story about your baby finger?" And Ajatasattu says, "No, I just heard, there was an accident when I was born." So Devadatta tells Ajatasattu of what happened with in a previous life. He was this ascetic, and he goes on. He encourages Ajatasattu, saying, "You should rightfully usurp the throne from your father. That's in your rights. You need to get your revenge." So Ajatasattu confronts his father and finds out that it is true what happened. And so he banishes his father, or he puts him in prison. And his whole idea is to starve him to death. In the meantime, the Queen Vaidehi, would go and visit King Bimbisara in prison. And what she would do is she would bathe herself in honey and hide food in her clothing. So no matter how long the king is in this prison, he doesn't starve because he's being fed by the queen. So when Ajatasattu asks his guards how his father is doing, expecting them to say he's very weak, they say he's fine. And he learns the fact that his mother had been smuggling food to him. So it sends Ajatasattu into a rage, and he's about to kill his mother when his advisors tell him, no, you can't do that. They say, in the history of mankind, there have been sons who have killed their fathers to usurp their thrones, but there has never been a case where a son has killed the mother. So Ajatasattu instead confines her to her palace. So house arrest, basically. And it's there that she calls for an audience with the Buddha. And she says, why am I suffering so? And she wants to go, she says she wants to be born into Amida's Pure Land. So this Contemplation Sutra is all about Shakyamuni Buddha telling Queen Vaidehi different meditative practices to see the Pure Land and Amida Buddha. And he goes by a step-by-step process. He first tells her to look to the west and contemplate on the setting sun. And he says, when that sun sets to the sea, that is where you'll find Amida's Pure Land. And then he goes on, and so step by step, he tells her to contemplate on different things. After 13 contemplative practices, he then talks about the 3 non-contemplative practices. And in there, he talks about 9 different levels of existence. He calls it the highest of the high, the middle of the high, and the lowest of the high. And then you have the highest of the middle of the middle, the low of the middle. And then at the bottom, you have the high of the lowest rank, the middle of the lowest rank, and the lowest of the lowest rank. And so associated with each of these different ranks are practices, the capacity of the individuals to do various practices. So in the highest of the highest rank, these are very capable individuals who can fulfill all the practices. And at the time of passing, they are welcomed by Amida and the myriads of bodhisattva and hosts. So there's 9 different ways of entering the Pure Land. And the lowest of the low, he said, is what we call those individuals who are incapable of following any practice. And yet at the time in a moment of death, they meet a wise teacher who encourages them to recite the name of the Buddha. And through the recitation of this name, they are reborn in the Pure Land. But this is what this Ryogen. So I went through a very long story just to point out this Ryogen. It was stated that those who are in the lowest can only be reborn through the recitation of the name Amida. And this was, and this not just Ryogen, but throughout history, it was seen that those who are born by reciting the name only it's a lower form of rebirth into the Pure Land. It's not quite as good as the highest high who are being reborn in the Pure Land. So, but it was nonetheless an attempt to introduce the Pure Land philosophy into the Tendai teachings. And it was after Ryogen, one of his disciples, Genshin. Genshin was the one that truly made Pure Land Buddhism a very integral part of the Tendai school but also made it a very prominent teaching in Japan. So this Genshin, he entered the monastery at a very young age and gave a lecture to imperial court when he was 15. And I mentioned this before, that the emperor was so impressed by this young monk in his lecture that he gave him reams of cloth to make fine clothing out of. And Genshin was overjoyed with this and sent that to his mother, thinking that she would be happy for him. But instead, she chastised him and saying that, oh, you've just become a common monk, when I thought you would be someone that would really connect the teachings to the masses. And Genshin realizes that it was his ego that got to him. And he, in fact, retreats to Mount Hiei and is said to have spent the rest of his life without coming down, but practicing throughout his life. But one of his most prominent works is this a collection of essential passages concerning birth in the Pure Land. And in it, he describes in detail the 8 realms of hell, as well as the image of the Pure Land. And according to Genshin, he says there are 10 pleasures associated with birth in the Pure Land. And they're listed here, and you could see them in your notes. Well, we could go through. Okay. At the moment of death, one meets Amida coming to welcome him to the Pure Land. And then the lotus flower into which one is born opens in the Pure Land. One is endowed with the 32 physical characteristics of a superior being. So this actually comes from India. It was believed that great individuals have 32 distinct physical features. So Shakyamuni Buddha was said to have it. One of them is like very long earlobes. That was one. Okay. Flat foot was another. Webbing between the fingers was another. The tuft of hair in the middle of the forehead. We call that the third eye, but it's actually a tuft of hair. Another was what they call the cranial bump. There's a bump on the head. So the statue of the Buddha, you'll see, it's not that his hair is put up into a bun, but actually that's supposed to be a bump, a cranial bump. But there are 32 distinct features that it comes from Hinduism, actually. And then one enjoys exquisite sensations with the 5 sense organs. The pleasures enjoyed never diminish. One can transfer one's merits so that those close to him can also be born into the Pure Land. One will meet holy sages. One will see Amida and listen to the Dharma taught by the Tathagata. One can at will move to other Buddha lands to listen to their teachings and make offerings to them. One advances on the path to enlightenment. So ultimately, this is the most important one, is that one attains enlightenment by going to a Pure Land. So he then, in this book, basically, a commentary, Genshin talks about how to attain birth in this Pure Land, and they're written here. And for those who are in the higher capacity, he said they could contemplate Amida's physical characteristics on his lotus throne, contemplate on the overall figure of Amida Buddha, or contemplation on the white twist of hair between the eyebrows of Amida Buddha. So these are people who are of the higher ranks. But he said for those who are unable to do the above, Genshin recommends a single-hearted repetition of the name of Amida. Also, to make this practice effective, Genshin teaches of 7-fold Nembutsu assisting actions. So these are auxiliary actions that you can do to assist you in reciting the name. although he talks about many different practices, he emphasizes, of course, reciting the name of the Buddha is most important. So in this collection of essentials concerning birth in the Western Pure Land, he really talks about both hell and Pure Land. And Genshin was also a very prominent artist, so he drew actual depictions of like hell and the different realms that existed. But he also did the Pure Land. And so from this, the common people of Japan became ingrained, or the idea of what hell is and what Pure Land is really became ingrained in them. Yeah, and through this, he taught for the average person the importance of reciting the name of the Buddha or the Nembutsu. And it was easy enough for anyone to follow. And this became a driving force in the development of Pure Land Buddhism. And in his footsteps, then we enter the Kamakura period with Honen, Shinran, etc. And here's just some more depictions of Amida Buddha. Here's so this one here. So in through Genshin, one of the things that he instilled or emphasized was what we call the death ritual. And what the death ritual was is that when one is about to pass away, it said one is to be laid on their side with the head to the north, facing the west, and they're supposed to place a statue of Amida Buddha, and they're supposed to take 7 strings. There's 7 auras or colors that they're supposed to attach from their finger to the statue of Amida, and constantly recite the Nembutsu. And by doing so, one scholar mentioned it's almost like mind training. So training your mind for what's going to happen when you pass away. And the whole idea was that at the time of death, that Amida Buddha would come down to welcome you, along with his 2 attendants, this Seishi and Kannon Bodhisattva. So there are many paintings actually in Japan where you see, and actually we have a scroll that was gifted to us. I'm not going to go and search for it now, but of these 3 Buddhas coming over this mountain. And it's a very famous image of the Amira Triad coming to welcome one at the time of passing. So this really, really played into the psyche of the people of Japan in a time where there was a great uncertainty, great toils, wars, etc., civil wars, etc. It was a way for people to get some release, some comfort, knowing that there is a place that we all will be accepted, that we all can go to. And so Amida, the whole teachings around associated with Amida Buddha take on a very prominent role in Japan. And we'll continue that from there next time. So thank you. And if anybody wishes to comment or...
I have a comment or a question, Sensei.
Sure.
In the beginning, when you were talking about the, you made a parallel, you jokingly, or maybe not jokingly, made a parallel to the
Father, Son,
the Holy Trinity. Is it the
Yes.
Holy, is that what it's called? You know, the Father,
Yeah.
Son, and Holy
Yeah.
Ghost?
Yeah.
You've made a couple comments in the past that when you make these sort of parallels to Christianity, it isn't necessarily very well received. And I wonder why. I always kind of wonder when you make that comment, why wouldn't it be well received?
I think there's a fear of authority, like, that no, we have to be very, we are unique, we are different, and unfortunately, I think that mindset is very strong in scholars or individuals who want to really emphasize their teachings or their beliefs, right? So no, we can't compare ourselves with others. We're ours is fundamentally different, right? And maybe they're right. I can't say, but I tend to take a little bit more of a liberal attitude to things, and I like to think a little bit more. I don't see the harm in trying to see similarities and where one can see it, or even trying to make things relevant. Like when I mentioned that Shinran Shonin, the founder of our school, Buddhism, spent 20 years on Mount Hiei as a Tendai monk. And for all intents and purposes, he was seen to be a very accomplished Tendai priest. And yet he left the monastery. And I compared it almost like a midlife crisis in our days, where somebody who might be very successful in their field of business or whatever it might be suddenly finds something lacking in it, and then they go off and do something else. And so I've made such a remark before, and of course I had scholars telling me no, it's much deeper than that midlife crisis. But I think you have to try to figure out ways of making it accessible to people and making it understandable to people. And I think where there is like, I don't see the harm in looking at. I guess the one reason why the scholars said the Holy Trinity is not really comparable is that in Christianity there is only one God, whereas in Buddhism there are, like I just introduced, a number of deities that are manifestations of the truth. So they would say, well, no, like when I say Amida is just one of those manifestations, in Christianity they can't say God is just one of those manifestations. God is God, right? So their argument would be that no, the comparison doesn't work because one is monotheistic and the other is we look at more than one deity. So, but I think it makes people understand when you say that there's something that's more ephemeral, like the Holy Ghost, and something that is more tangible, like God. God is a representation of the infinite as well. Mind you, okay, this is a Buddhist explaining Christianity, so I will have a Buddhist slant on how I perceive Christianity. It may not be how a Christian would explain Christianity, but I look at God also as a manifestation of the infinite. Like the word God is a word that we've created so that we can associate with something that is infinite, as far as I'm concerned. Okay, and of course that might not be how a Christian would. Anybody from a Christian background want to help me out here? Rose, you have to unmute yourself.
I think, Sensei, can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. What happens is many Buddhist scholars or Hindu scholars, or I've seen this in Sikhism as well. They identify their faith or their religion as a pure one, and any comparison with any other religion or parallels is frowned upon. It is just not Buddhist. It's in every religion. The
I
Puritans
agree.
or that they don't like that comparison. But your objective in doing so is to facilitate the understanding of the audience. But they don't get that point. They think that it's something we should not go there. We should not touch other religions, and we should be remaining pure and faithful to ours.
Yeah, I agree. And by no means am I trying to I'm not trying to offend if somebody from the Christian faith might be offended by that comparison.
Yeah.
That's not the point. So
Yeah, and I think that Durgesh is, from a Christian, although I've been a Buddhist practitioner for close to 50 years, but I was brought up in Protestant and Catholicism. But what is interesting to me is that over time, we adapt, we change, we understand, we understand at a deeper level. And many of my friends who are Christian practitioners, Protestant, and I'm going to say United Church, depending again on I'm going to call it the Sangha, the community, things are perceived a little differently. When I was growing up, there were certainly no LGBTQ people recognized in my the community that I grew up in. But of course there were, and many of the priests, the Catholic priests were, but it was in order to keep the order in the parish or I mean, it's not just the parish priest, there's a hierarchy. And so, but I think certainly in this country, so many people from so many cultures and religions and backgrounds, how wonderful to be able to see the connection spiritually that we have. And I think that it just helps us so much. I am so fortunate to have that other view, because it has allowed me to have more trust and confidence in what I now am doing, because it's something that I was so grateful that I've been able to have that, but that doesn't lessen anything that I learned as a child. So that's what I think. So thank you, Sensei, and thank you, Debbie. That was such a wonderful opportunity for us to just think about that. But, we always have to watch our P's and Q's, as my Protestant mother said, watch our P's and Q's. I don't really to this day know what that meant, but there you go. So thank you, everyone.
Actually, that reminded me, because Christianity has adapted as well.
Yep.
And a very interesting adaptation that happened. Again, this was when I was in Toronto, and one of our members, she was marrying a Catholic, Roman Catholic, and so the couple put in a request to the archdiocese to do a Buddhist Roman Catholic wedding. And in the past, that would have been frowned upon, because in order to get married in the Catholic Church, one had to convert to be a Catholic in the past, right? So they actually agreed to this. And we actually did a joint Buddhist Catholic wedding ceremony in the Archdiocese of Toronto. And so, but what was interesting was that our member, she didn't have to convert over to Catholicism, but her and her husband had to sign a contract saying that they would raise their children as Catholics. And so the question was, what happens, like, if they didn't raise them as Catholics? I mean, are they going to be like, is this contract, legal? And what would happen? And so the answer was that it's much worse than litigation, because this is all eternity. You'll be damned for all eternity if you break it. So it was very interesting, though. But they are trying. There was a attempt of adaptation, and of course, it also has to do with the individuals involved. So at the time, at the archdiocese, there was a very, very understanding Catholic father. So depending on the individuals who are in there, it will change as well. Any other comments or questions or commentaries? If not, then Hashimoto-san, you have anything you want to share? Or yeah. Oh, Tomoko-san, you have to unmute yourself, though.
Why are there 9 levels of
9 levels?
individuals in the Pure Land?
So that's a good question. So it was thought at one point that the more capable you are, the better rebirth into Amida's Pure Land is. So the people that are very capable of doing various practices, when they pass away, they immediately go to the Pure Land. They're welcomed by Amida Buddha and all these other hosts of bodhisattvas, etc. In comparison, the lowest of the lowest people, they're incapable of doing any practice. And yet, if they recite Namo Amida Butsu, when they pass away, they see Amida and I think it's just Amida and Kannon and Seishi, just the 3 of them. They see them in a dream, and then they have to spend 500 years. So originally it was said that, depending on the more capable you are, the better kind of birth that you would have. Okay. However, Shinran sort of flipped everything around completely, saying that no, actually, it's for the lowest of these lowest that this Pure Land exists. Those completely incapable of doing any practice. And that's where we see the true compassion of Amida Buddha. So
Kannisho is that the one?
yes,
Oh,
Tanisho.
okay.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
so Shinran sort of completely flipped how traditionally it was viewed. So traditionally it was viewed that, the more capable person is going to be getting the much better birth type thing. But and we'll get into that, how Shinran's ideas were quite different from others. And this is actually something that not only Shinran, but all the Buddhist monks, part of the practice is to try to decipher or find the true meaning behind each of these sutras. So there was a famous painting called Unryu, and that's the dragon in the clouds. And so on the surface, you only see the clouds, but there is the dragon that's hidden behind. So when we read the Buddhist sutras, what is important is to try to find the true meaning behind it. And so that's why we'll talk more about it next time, but like in Zen Buddhism, the koan is also one way of deciphering the truth. Okay. When you and we'll wait till next week.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Junichi-san, were you going to say something? You were trying to unmute yourself.
May I ask,
Yes.
did you say Horyuji for the Uzuma-san no Kannon-san?
No, Horyuji.
Horyuji よね。いや、
Horyuji, not
いや、
Horyuji. Horyuji is in Nara.
奈良でしょ？
Yeah.
うん。
Horyuji.
Okay, thank you.
Uzuma.
And also, do you have today's lecture printed? I mean,
Yeah, I sent
Are you-
it by, I
you
just
send
sent it
it?
by email. Yeah,
Oh,
but I
okay.
could give you a copy.
Yeah, okay.
Mother's privileges.
Can I ask a question as well?
Thank you.
Yes, yes.
Where does the concept of samsara fit into this? Is samsara like rebirth, but in a bad way, right? Not
Yeah.
going.
So right from the beginning of the Buddhist teachings, we talk about suffering, right?
Mhm.
So the Buddha said that this existence is a world of, he called it samsara, which is the world of suffering, a delusion, a world of delusion. Okay. And so samsara is this wheel of delusion. And I showed the Tibetan tanka with the picture of the 6 realms of existence. And then there's the Mara on top of that. And then there's the beast that's sort of guarding that wheel. Okay. And so basically, samsara is this existence of delusion which keeps on going around. It's like the hamster's wheel in the cage. It just goes round and round and round in circles until you're able to get off of it. Okay, and that's what the Buddha did, was he attained enlightenment and he got off that hamster wheel. Right. So samsara comes right from the very beginning of Buddhism, and it's this existence of a delusion of suffering, of ignorance, what it is, the existence of ignorance that he said that, we are in. And the only way to get out of that is really to get off that wheel of suffering. Yeah. Does that help?
Yeah, so that would be where most people would be in, even unless
Yeah,
you
so we are so
Dharma.
the samsara there's 6 different realms. So they call it the hell, the hungry ghosts, the fighting beasts, fighting spirits, humans, and what they call the pseudo heavenly realm, where materialistically it's all beautiful and fine, but in the end they have a very lonely existence. They pass away in a lonely existence. So yeah, it's a world of ignorance and we are definitely in, I am also part of the ignorance. And what so how traditionally Buddhists viewed things was that in order to get out of that existence of samsara, you needed 3 things. One was you needed the teaching, you needed a practice to go along with that teaching, and then you needed to attain enlightenment from that practice. Okay. So traditionally it was seen, the more practice you do, the more merit, and it makes sense, perfect sense. The more harder practice you do, the more accomplished you become, the more you're going to attain enlightenment. Whereas Shinran realized that no matter how hard he practiced, he was still on this hamster wheel, if you will. He couldn't get off by himself. He needed some other help, if you will, to get off this wheel. And that was this other power or of Amida Buddha. He realized that was the true essence for him of what the Buddha was telling us, was that we could practice as hard as we want, but we are limited by our own human self. And so therefore, in order to transcend that, we need something. And that's basically the Dharma that transcends that, right?
Thank you.
Thank you. Juichi-san, go ahead.
It's not totally backed up question. It's more like my own thoughts. Normally, I felt this Heian period was a quite rough ages and then period, and poverty came and life and death, and always people were at the bottom of the happiness, actually unhappy, and a very ugly season. So that Shindan obviously went through that period too. The Buddhism sculptures, like images, and that triad also gives the people more to pray. It's like this is where I am still not quite sure where I am looking at it. Always people, even today, my grandmother was praying. People are praying all the time to get help from the Bosatsu. And so that side and this philosophy here, how to live yourself, how do I deal with my life, is a bit quite different. I mean, slightly different and very importantly different. So right now I am trying to get more, like after 2 years of studying under you, with you, I am getting into a more, how do I have to live, or how do I put myself into throwing away or shaping up the old bonnos out of my thoughts. So that's a kind of very low-level comment. So,
Thank you. It's funny because I think the more you learn about Buddhism, the more you realize it is also about letting go of things that we are attached to. And one of the hardest things to get to let go of is ideas or concepts.
yeah,
Because we always think my idea is right or my concept is right.
yeah,
And it only changes, I think, over time. And the best example for me for that was when I was still a student in Japan, and we learned all about this Amida Buddha, and one of the things we learned is that the altars that we have in the house, particularly in Jodo Shinji,
yeah,
the altars that we have in our house, for a lot of people, they think the altar is where the ancestors reside.
right.
And so they would chant to the ancestors. But in Jodo Shinshu, we are taught, in fact, the altar houses Amida Buddha. And so ultimately, in Jodo Shinshu, it said that we should try to make an effort to go to our mother temple in Kyoto. But when you can't go to the mother temple, then it's important to go to your local temple. But if you can't go to your local temple all the time, then you have the altar at home. So we were taught, my education was that that altar is not necessarily a place to house ancestors, but
Mhm.
it's the altar that holds Amida Buddha. It's where we go to listen to the Dharma. So that was how I was taught, and that was fine. But when I was a student in Japan, I helped out one summer, or a couple summers actually,
Mhm.
with the Obon service.
Yes. Mhm.
The tradition is to go to the various houses, to
Yeah.
each member's house to do a short service. So
Mhm.
I would go to their houses to do the service. And one house I went to, the lady said, "Oh, I chant every morning." And I said, "Well, that's wonderful." And then she said, "But I chant not in the traditional kanji, but there's another chant that's in Japanese." And so she
Mhm.
said, "Chants that in Japanese." And I said, "Well, that's fine." And then she said, "Yeah, I chanted in Japanese because my parents, as well as my husband who have passed away, they don't understand the Chinese. So I
Okay.
chanted in Japanese. They can understand." So at that time, I thought, I didn't say it, but I thought to myself, "Oh, she's making a mistake," is what I thought, right?
Mhm.
But now I think she was much wiser than I am,
Mhm.
because she had let go.
Mhm.
I was still at the stage of concepts, and this is what Amida, but
Mhm.
she was
Oh,
beyond that. She was
oh,
beyond that. So I think she was much wiser than I am. It didn't matter to her whether, my teacher says, "No, this is what the altar is." To her, it was a way for her to keep in contact with their ancestors, a way for her to find spiritual peace. And I think that's actually much wiser than just coming out of a textbook saying, "This is where we house Amida Buddha." So I think the concepts, ideas change over time. And I think that simple, one might call it a simple understanding, but I think she had a much deeper respect than I did. And so I really see that in a different light now.
Mhm.
Anyways, we could talk about this more next week. So thank
Yeah.
you all, and
All right.
we'll see you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Sensei.
Good
Thank you
night.
very much.